My dear, devoted husband.
Susan!
Yes, people acknowledging the queen that is Sue Storm. Marvel Rivals has gotten many Marvel fans and new burgeoning ones to take in interesting characters they hadn't before, or in some to be interested or intrigued by versions of characters that they may not have been aware of. The Season 1 Eternal Night Falls trailer released in early 2025, showcasing that the first family would be joining the Rivals universe. At the same time, they would also drop with a variety of skins, and some stood out more than others. Sue Storm, the Invincible Woman's evil or malice skin, made some eyebrows raise. It is indeed a real costume from a real arc, actually a couple of arcs. This character tends at times to be reduced down to her costume, how brazen it was, how scandalous it was, whether or not it was appropriate or not. For those who are familiar with the first arc, it's also the one where Reed slaps Sue across the face, and so sometimes that's why it gets play. But there's actually much more to it than that. I may get a bit more passionate about this one than usual because there's so much to Malice that's worth discussing. Whether or not one enjoys the character or the arc or not, there's a lot there. It's complex, layered, messy. Some parts have held up incredibly well in terms of the emotional depth behind them, others not so much. This is also the arc that leads from Sue going from being called the Invisible Girl to the Invisible Woman, also a big deal for that reason. So there's a lot to discuss, and I'm excited because so oftentimes this is just swept under the rug as, look at that costume. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and it's time to explore Malice, the mistress of hate. And we're going to be touching on a lot of things because this arc goes places. We're going to be talking about miscarriage, assault, and yes, strange costume design choices. There's much to break down. Firstly, it must be stated that Marvel has had many characters named Malice. Sue Storm is not the first. She was the fourth, and each one tends to have a different modus operandi. The first two were kind of similar. They both worked for Killmonger, and the third was a Ghost Rider villain. The others, we're not talking about them right now, although there is an interesting follow-up involving a Claremont version of Malice, but that's for another time. Sue's Malice is its own thing, and this character, or version of her, and this costume debuted in the Fantastic Four 280 from 1985. Written and drawn by John Byrne, with inks by Jerry Ordway, and colors Glynis Oliver. I have the Omni down there. I have them in physical form. I'll never have to forget. Now, like many comics of this era, there would be an A plot and a B plot, sometimes even a C plot. And issue 280 is seeing a point where a B plot is overtaking the main plot, or the former main plot. Throughout several issues leading up to this, there had been sequences showing that someone was sowing hate in New York. They were passing out pamphlets, they were inflaming racial tensions. It started with more obvious biases and then started to expand outwards, just everything. And it was starting to gain traction. In this issue, it all comes to a head. The city starts to erupt, and Reed feels that there's something unnatural at play, and so goes to try and figure it out. In this way, they have to split up, and Sue goes to escort Alicia home, because she can turn invisible, and so they can just kind of duck through the crowd. This was the era of the Fantastic Four where the She-Hulk was on the team, and the Thing was off it, so that's why you're not going to see the Thing in these stories, at least these first couple. We see in issue 280 that a mysterious villain is looking to have Sue separate from the others, that this is part of his master plan, and that mysterious villain is the Psycho Man, who is a being from Subatomica. This also involves a compatriot of his transforming into Reed to lull Sue into a false sense of security. Yes, Master, it takes no more than the blinking of an eye for me to drop the shape I currently wear in favor of one the Invisible Girl will find more trustworthy. The issue leaves you in suspense for a bit as, ooh, what does that mean? While Reed goes to investigate at Avengers Manor. They're not living in the Baxter building because it was launched off into space. That was another thing. And we next see, I won't bury the lead, we next see Sue, even though the comic lets you have a bit of suspense as to who is this, even though it's dropping hints that it's her. The first look is when the tensions are erupting and the police van carrying She-Hulk and Wyatt Wingfoot was overturned. They were arrested earlier in the issue because they were standing up to the police brutality that was occurring around the remnants of the Baxter building. A moment of your time, She-Hulk. There is an ordeal through which you must pass before you go any further. If you go any further after your ultimate defeat at the hands of Malice, mistress of hate, you have got to be kidding. We're going to save talk of the costume for the moment. We'll put that later because otherwise people tend to get bogged down there, and then lots of the other layers and aspects of the story can be lost, and that's where a lot of interesting parts are. Put a pin, except to note that this is deliberately meant to be a contrast to the way that Sue normally presents herself. It's very intentional, and it serves a purpose outside of the fetishistic, even though that is part of what's going on. It's admittedly present. It's right there in some of the choices of the design, but there's also an internal logic for it as well. For some, that will be enough, for others not. We'll get to it. Now, we're given indicators through Malice's fight with She-Hulk that this is Sue, and we really get to see her flex her powers in an aggressive and offensive capacity. And she's reveling in it. How absurdly simple it is to smash such overconfident fools. It is just as the Master said. I've been wasting my powers, frittering them away on childish things. Now Malice will rule. She's able to take out the She-Hulk the same way she did the Hulk, by placing a force field around the head and they can't breathe. The Invisible Woman, still a girl at this point, is incredibly powerful. Indeed, in the next issue, Reed will even put forth the idea that she's actually the strongest member of the four, and that's why he's not worried about her when she's not back yet. Which is very important in terms of how he views her, and how strong he knows her to be. It's going to be important to contrast with her own self-perception, her own insecurities, and also as a contrast for some actions that he's going to take at the end of the next issue. As for this issue, 280, we get the reveal that the hate was being stoked by a version of the hate monger, or so it seemed, and that this is a version of Susan Storm Richards. It's in issue 281 that has the costume on the cover, where we get to delve even more into Malice and what's fueling her. In 280, Reed had discovered that something subatomic was going on with the pamphlets, that people were being influenced on some kind of molecular level. It's a combination of tech and things. It's something that can be overridden though. He's got to science that science, that's what he's there for. Issue 281 shows the payoff for this. The takeover of Sue is precisely because she is the most powerful member. Psycho Man wants her to destroy the Fantastic Four. There's an extra layer of sadness there then when he's able to manipulate her own insecurities about her place on the team, and as a female superhero, he's then able to tap into this latent rage and turn it inside out. So part of this rage is manifesting inside of the costume, playing with the idea of this is what it means to be assertive and confident. But at the same time, it's warped, twisted because of the source. And that's why it's so important to see Reed hyping her up that same issue, to show that the people on the team don't feel the same way that she feels about herself. Also, that they're not fully aware that this is bothering her. At the very least, that's bothering her to this extent on some level. Subconsciously. Subatomic. A woman. Okay, some of the things that she's concerned about for Reed, probably a little valid. A woman destroying the city. It's not like we haven't seen that several times. Don't you mean just a woman? Reed Richards. Someone to be ignored at worst, patronized at best. Someone to be stifled, frustrated at every turn. Capable of bearing children, but never responsibility. Certainly not someone capable of doing this. See, here you're getting to see Sue working through what her purpose is on the team. What is her function? Of rage and anger and frustration at potentially being perceived as only having one purpose. A genuine appeal to a uniquely female rage in terms of what she's talking about, in terms of the function. And in general, it's a rage that some might be able to identify with. The idea that they're not being seen to their full potential. Everybody wants to be seen. There's a little malice in all of us. She's able to quite easily defeat Reed and Johnny, all while airing some specific grievances for each man. Your ego knows no bounds. There will be no second time. Don't you understand that? No opportunity to disguise your blunder with pretty speeches. It's all over. Now you're going to die. And believe me, your pathway to death's dark domain will not be easy. I intend to see you suffer, Reed Richards. Suffer as you have never suffered before. What you gonna do, cutie? Bore him to death? Impudent young pup. It's long past time you were taught a lesson. The fact that it takes them a while to figure out who she is also angers her. You took much longer to figure it out than I'd expected, my loved ones, my loving husband, my devoted brother. But then, why would you even consider that your utter defeat could come at the hands of one for whom you have no respect? Susan Storm, the Invisible Girl.
No respect? Sis, what are you talking about? What have they done to you? Of course we respect you. Sue, we love you.
Liar! Force field to the chest. This scene truly illustrates the magnitude, the depth of the feelings that have been able to be stirred up inside of her. And they're not coming from nowhere. That's the thing. This tracks back to very early in the Fantastic Four's history. There's a whole part of an issue dedicated to how she feels sad because she's getting letters from fans about how she's not important. This is a through line for Sue. And this arc, in a way, is trying to address that. So in that sense, it's much more than, oh, this is an evil Sue. There's layers, depth. It doesn't matter how they view her, it matters how she feels about herself and how she feels they view her. It allows her to be a character. Strong, weak, complex, everything. Because the Psycho Man and his hate-monger creation work by manipulating real emotions and fears, not by implanting them. Now, a less well handle is how Reed snaps her out of it, or rather slaps her out of it. You know, sometimes women folk are being hysterical. At least that's what Reed thinks. What he's determined is that to get her back, they'll need an overload of the hate. That on some core level, they need to get past this conditioning. So he's gonna play into her insecurities even more. And the method he chooses is being as sexist as possible. And he does so with more than cruel words, and he plays the part to a T. It's very convincing. Perhaps a little too convincing. I hear you muttering, whispering, plotting your moves against me, but it's all useless. You cannot stand against me. I see that now. I see everything so clearly now. Susan, be quiet. Daredevil and I are in no mood to listen to your drivel any longer. Your cowardly attack has temporarily incapacitated Johnny, and we must tend to him. So just shut up now. What? You dare speak to me like that? Susan, I told you to be quiet. We indulged your foolish female outbursts, but now is not the time for such games. Monster, I'll smash you!
Oh, will you, Susan?
Do you truly believe your pathetic force fields are of any use against the Fantastic Four? Please, don't make me laugh in your face, Susan. You'd have been killed outright years ago, but for the rest of us carrying you. Why you? Susan, I said shut up. You! I hate you. I hate you. She's hysterical. There's a lot to examine here, aside from the fact that it worked. Chief amongst them is that, again, the whole Evil Sue moniker is just scratching the surface. Also, Reed's resorting to physical violence, it's a lot. You can follow the logic, sort of. Base, him playing into her fears, is not the worst idea. But to have the world's smartest man at the time have to actually strike his wife, that's the only thing he could think of, it's not the finest moment. One would assume that there could be some kind of other solution. Even just having him ignore her or act like what she was doing wasn't really having any kind of impact would have still played into those fears. Rather than the aggressive approach they went with. It's not the strongest Reed moment, and it could have been a Cursed Panels episode. Some of what's going on in this arc, there's also some behind the scenes things at play. The Fantastic Four is being forced to tie into Secret Wars in a way that John Byrne did not enjoy. This Malice arc feels like it could have been longer. It does feel very much like a speed run of everything going on. But this is also interesting to examine on a marriage level. Reed and Sue have a very complex marriage. One that, when it's allowed to revel in some of their differences, really showcases how much they have to work at it, and that can be very fascinating. Reed knows exactly which buttons to push and where Sue's triggers are. It shows how well they know each other, and it adds a layering to her anger, and it makes the reader question, is some of what she's feeling justified? The thing is, Sue loves Reed, but she also has these frustrations and feelings. He even notes them, even if he doesn't fully understand them, but he does make the attempt to. The way he describes what happened is her compassion being turned inside out. That's not exactly what happened. It's more the things that bothered her were inflamed. She was forced to feel the things that she already felt to some extent. It was used to turn her to somebody else's advantage, and this will be detailed in later issues. But those issues were there. And they don't drop this. They keep going with it, and they have it finish out. Sue wants revenge. She's angry. She's very raw, and the story treats this like a violation, because it was. And issue 282 gets very explicit about it. It has Sue confront Reed about her feelings, especially when he wants to go and deal with some Secret Wars 2 stuff, which may also be some projection from the author. I don't believe this. Dreams, alien invasions, monsters, and every time I've had to be calm and quiet and understanding. Sis? Well, no more. Franklin, you get back to your room this instant.
Sue, darling. The lad is upset. That's most unlike you. I really don't think...
No, you don't, Reed. You never think, unless it's about some impossible invention or unstoppable menace. Well, I say enough.
I've spent most of my adult life following you into countless battles, risking everything, everyone I love, to save the world one more time.
Well, this time it's my turn.
Now then, Susan, I think you owe all of us some kind of an explanation.
What in the world is the meaning of this uncharacteristic outburst?
Do you see how the way he's talking to her aligns to some of the complaints that she had as Malice? And the thing is, he's not doing it intentionally, and the question is also valid, but there is a bit of a patronizing element to it.
And yet, the two do care for each other.
Oh, Reed, can you just for 1 second stop being so cold-bloodedly rational and just once think with your heart instead of your head? Don't you understand what the Psycho Man did to me? Working through his pawn, the hate monger, he reached deep down inside me. He grabbed a hold of my heart, Reed, and he twisted it, turned it inside out. Women all over the world know the threat of physical assault. Many spend their whole lives stymied by that single, all-consuming fear. But no living woman has ever been assaulted as I have been. Physically, I am unscathed, but my innermost self, my soul.
Sue feels she's been violated, something that is likened to rape. That Malice costume, it's not a good thing, and there is an element of the exploitative nature of it that is, again, part of what's going on. Now we can dive into that a bit. Now, yes, there is the whole less clothes equals less morality, virgin whore dichotomy at play, but I would argue that's the least interesting aspect of this story. It's a part of it, but there's also so many more elements and pieces. Not to say that that's not worth discussing, but it needs to be discussed in tandem with all the other things and not to the point where the other elements are thrown out. The fact this costume is so sexy, in quotes, on the one hand, could be viewed as the author's barely disguised fetish. It has some strong kink elements to it. And Byrne had a history of adding those BDSM elements to costumes, particularly from mentally manipulated to villainy female characters. Think about the Dark Phoenix saga, something that this is often compared to, and most times found wanting. So there are those elements at play. However, there's more to consider. While some of it may not be intentional, it's still interesting. One can also ponder the linkage of sexuality to empowerment that is present in some societies and certain aspects and that some women feel. It's actually a complex issue and interesting to think about whether that's part of what's at play in the presentation of Sue. Or is that agency being taken away from her through the manipulation, the ability to present herself as she chooses, and the negotiations at play in that? Where does the costume sit in regards to that? Sue has a history of being intentional with her costuming, so there's a lot to consider there. This is part of the reason some don't want to see it again. The question then becomes, can it be recontextualized and reclaimed? Can something like Rivals give it an alternate meaning and appreciation? And when it comes to the original story, there is a lot to consider, because so much of the rest of this arc is thinking about Sue in a very real way. Its mileage varies on how much it lands and how well it treats Sue. But she is a person, and this arc is trying to work through her feelings of her own agency. And though it's not done too deeply, this is also tied into her feelings about her miscarriage. Reed, what about Sis? I've never seen her like this. So much emotion bristling inside like she's gonna explode. I don't think she was this upset even when she lost the baby. Notice how they're talking again about like, ooh, too many emotions. Women can't be too emotional now. And that Johnny is trying to rank her traumas and gauge how upset is too upset. There is a reason to worry because there was a bit of psychic manipulation at play, but the way it's presented can be read as a bit callous. Of course she's upset. She has told Reed that she feels like she was psychically assaulted. A different kind of distress perhaps, Johnny. But you're right. This is a side of Susan I've not seen before in all the years of our marriage. I admit I'm disturbed by it. Thing is, even though he's disturbed, Reed says that she needs their support and he intends to support her. He's trying. Again, though, this showcases how those insecurities that the Psycho Man was able to manipulate, they're not coming from nowhere. These discussions about how much emotion she should or should not be feeling, they definitely play into what she was concerned about. But at the same time, no one on the team is trying to be malicious. There's such a gamut and depth going on here, and it's curious to ponder how much was intentional and how much is incidental. And it's not over for poor Sue. The next issue, 283, she goes toe-to-toe with the Psycho Man on the kind of psychic mindscape, and the Psycho Man plays into all of her fears. That she's not good enough, that she's not strong enough, that she's inferior to Reed, that he views her as a child, how she's haunted by the death of her parents, now how that has impacted her entire life. Doubt that your powers are enough against the many foes you face so frequently, and with that doubt, fear that if your powers should prove unworthy, it's not you who will pay the price, but your dearest friends and loved ones. And with that fear again, fear that the gulf of years between yourself and your husband creates in his mind the image of you as a foolish child, undeserving of his love. Sue is essentially tortured with her own insecurities in this arc. The thing is, she's already confronted these things, and they were unleashed in the form of Malice. Malice, the manifestation of all these negative emotions unchecked. The story itself does acknowledge that she's been put through the ringer. And you too, Susan, are you all right? I think so. As all right as I'll ever be. It's in issue 284 where Sue gets her vengeance, which is something she wanted. She's able to save Reed, who is also being emotionally assaulted by the Psycho Man and forced to face his fear, that if he loses his intellect, he'll let everybody down and he'll be useless. And Sue lets a little bit of that malice out in how she takes down the Psycho Man, torturing him with his own devices. The Psycho Man is no longer any threat to us. He won't bother anyone ever again. But the story then further acknowledges that something deeper is going on that can't be cured with that one moment of catharsis. What about you, Sue, darling? Do you feel out from under yet? He's thinking, can this situation be solved by slapping? I feel better, Reed. I suppose that's a start. The thing is, at the end of this issue, Sue really evaluates her own feelings and articulates them. The Psycho Man did more than twist my emotions. He forced me to look into the deepest corners of my soul, forced me to confront who I am, what I've become. When we rocketed into the cosmic ray belt, when we gained our superpowers, we lost something, an innocence, childlike naivety. For a long time, I've tried to go on as if we're still the same people we used to be, as if I was still the same, but I'm not. Not after all that's happened to us. Not after what the Psycho Man did to me. There is no invisible girl anymore, Reed. She died when the Psycho Man twisted her soul. From now on, I am the invisible woman. This is a profound moment in Fantastic Four history, and also one that some were surprised to realize took so long in coming. But here we have Sue deciding to define her own label and embrace the maturity she feels and give herself a title that she wants, taking the control back. So the Invisible Woman stems from that Malice arc. Now, not everyone liked this arc. In fact, from what I could glean, there were some people who outright hated it, viewing it as an objectification or reduction of Sue, feeling like nothing like that should ever have happened to Sue. And that perception has intensified in some ways based on how this is presented, oftentimes just in chopped bits or just simply with a picture of the costume or a picture of Reed slapping Sue. Come on, Reed. The other reason that seems to be the case is because there's an arc later on that goes out of its way to remove Malice entirely. So we're gonna hop to that. There are some other appearances a bit before in the Silver Surfer, but Malice is pushed back. So we're gonna focus on the start of the next big Malice moment, which is in Fantastic Four 369. Malice Toward All. Written by Tom DeFalco, with art by Paul Ryan, inks Danny Bulanati, and colors Gina Going. This return is a tie-in to the Infinity War saga. Ben's back. The She-Hulk Fantastic Four era is at an end, for this is 1992. The Malice portion of this story comes in the fact that Sue is confronted with Malice inside of her own mind, as the evil version of herself. That's very much how it's played. It starts off with the idea that Malice was just this temporary identity that she adopted at one point. It does not go into any of the underlying emotions that were underpinning that. It plays it much more as, oh, this was just an alternate, scantily clad evil version of Sue. Forget them. You worry too much about others. Well, you are the true problem, child. Hi, sweetie. I hope you haven't forgotten. Malice. What are you doing here? You aren't real. You're only a temporary identity I once assumed. My girlie, you're awfully quick with the denials. Repression can be extremely hazardous to a delicate psyche, but you've never been as delicate as you appear. Also note that Malice speaks a bit more differently. She's more overt villain. It's less cold, distilled rage and frustration. You and the others will never survive without my naked aggression. I am hurling razor-sharp invisiblades right at you, my dear. Throw off your inhibitions, your psychological restraints. Free the she-devil that lies within. Accept the fact that you've always been the most powerful, deadliest member of the Fantastic Four, and revel in the unrestrained ferocity. Now, ultimately, Sue appears to win this battle and merges with Malice. This battle also placed those traits of her being powerful and aggressive as negatives. It doesn't define by how much either, so it could come across as a blanket statement. But it also treats it like her negative emotions are something to be feared and defeated rather than lived with. This is much more handled as an arc that's going to right the wrongs of Malice, and it also goes on for quite a while. Malice isn't gone in this arc, and there's a bunch of dialogue going forward as to how aggressive Sue's become and how she's changing, such as in 370. I'm concerned about Susan. She's far more confident and aggressive, but colder, harder. It may only be my imagination, but it's almost as if she's undergone a subtle alteration. Not more confident, not Sue. Sue should only be as confident as Reed deems, or This is the arc that leads to the infamous 4 cutout window costume. As Malice starts to influence Sue more and more, she dons this costume to try and get some attention from Reed. There is an element of sexual frustration there. That's something else that Malice is embodying, this kind of yearning to be desired by Reed, which is something interesting, and again, not something necessarily negative for Sue to be feeling, but it's going to be treated that way. Eventually, in issue 384, the fact that Malice was more in control came to a head, which led to a confrontation with Psylord, who is Franklin Richards from an alternate future. And they do battle, and Malice is temporarily placed inside the Psylord. That issue tries to situate Malice as an alien entity, that's what happened back in the Infinity War tie-in. Malice as an alien entity moving even further away from her as what she was at the start, part of Sue's psyche. Adding to that idea that it's wrong for Sue to have such negative feelings. It just can't be. It must be something else. This is also a way to retcon all the more salty Sue moments, making them purely Malice so that Sue can remain more pristine. The intent is to remove Malice, but the implications are wider. If thought about, it's a bunch of little things like the fact that they keep calling her a she-devil when lots of what she represents are these complex feelings that Sue's not being treated well or up to her full potential. It may not be the intent, but that doesn't come across very well. It's as if saying that there's something wrong with Sue for wanting to feel more appreciated or valued. Those feelings rendered literally alien. And again, I note that may not have been the intent, but it's certainly a read one can get from it. Now, at first it looks like the Psylord has destroyed Malice, but that quickly proves to not be the case as of issues 386 and 387. 387 also sees the end of the boob window costume. All of this leads to an arc to remove Malice for good, as in issue 392, Franklin, with Sue's help, casts Malice into the mind of the Dark Raider, who is an evil version of Reed, and then it seems that that Reed is cast into the abyss later on, so maybe Malice is gone for good. If the rival skin really takes off, though, probably not. Now, there are multiple things at play here to consider. Malice at the time was not a popular concept. If we're looking at her being excised in 392, it's been years since she first came back into the picture. So that means years of a slightly altered Sue. Some fans wanted her gone and indeed wished the entire ordeal had never happened. So seeing her actually removed, cast off, was a cause for celebration for some. Hooray, freedom, no more Malice, and gone into the mind of evil Reed. Bonus. However, there is another way to look at it, and I will preface this by saying it was likely not the intent. However, follow the thought through for a moment. Malice began life as the manifestation of Sue's frustrations about what she perceived as sexist treatment, her insecurities, her feelings of inadequacy. Some of it was tied up a bit with her miscarriage. There was a later manifestation of her sexual frustration at lack of attention from Reed. By reintroducing this as an evil alien presence and then saying it must be excised, it could be read as saying that those negative feelings have no place in a good woman. In a way that's playing into a lot of stereotypes about that dichotomy. Good woman, bad woman, virgin, whore. Stereotypes that a woman must be pleasant, demure, not too confident, not too aggressive, not too sexual. I will again note that this was most likely not the intent at all. It was most likely just to get rid of Malice, no more. However, when you have moments like in 376 of the entire concept of Malice or those negative feelings being outright rejected, it does make one ponder, or makes me ponder at least. For Sue to gain control and live with those elements to not be enough, but for them to have to be removed. If one views along those lines, it's quite horrifying. And still, in the future comics, Sue fears Malice, these negative feelings as if they should not be. You see this later in Original Sin when Malice comes up and you have this moment where Sue is very aggressive and then she's afraid. Now, this was also referenced in adaptation, outside of Marvel Rivals, in the oft-times forgotten 90s Fantastic Four cartoon.
Or you will meet your ultimate defeat at the hands of Malice, Mistress of Hate.
Forget it, lady.
We've gone on for a while, so I'm not going to highlight this too much. It's a rapid-fire adaptation of the original Byrne story.
Susan! Stop this nonsense at once!
It very much is taking this in a more flippant, tongue-in-cheek way as well, with the jokes and how it's presented, the fact that Reed wants her to keep the costume.
Although you do look fetching in black. Johnny, take the controls.
I'm all over it. Cool.
I saw a comment when I posted these first pictures that said, "It's Malice Monday, better hydrate," and I laughed. Maybe that episode deserves its own video. What do you think? So I think it's clear that I have some strong feelings about Malice, or rather about Sue as Malice, because again, there have been multiple Malices. Is it the best arc ever? No. Is every aspect of it well handled? Definitely not. But it deserves so much more credit than it gets. It's really interesting and allows for a breadth of examination and analysis of Sue, and there are several avenues that aren't fully explored but are kind of hinted at. Yes, there is the whole evil version of a character who's all scantily clad, and that can be overdone. But Malice, while falling into that trope, was more than that. Perhaps that's where some of my passion comes from, seeing so much of this arc just dismissed offhand. It's not about whether people like it or don't like it. There are tons of reasons not to like it. Outside of the costume. I don't know. The first story just hit me for some reason. This story has some merit, and it's worth examining, and it's interesting to think about Sue having all these feelings and insecurities. It makes her a more complex and well-rounded character. And she already has a lot going for her. Now, as mentioned though, at the same time, I can entirely see why people did not enjoy this arc or this character. It's quite the departure from how Sue is typically depicted. The costume can feel quite exploitive, like it's just leering at her. The arc may feel heavy-handed or trite. Some feel that she shouldn't be depicted that way because she's a mom, which is a whole other conversation about how women who are mothers should or shouldn't be depicted. The return of the arc really took a very long time and presented a version of Sue that wasn't the most likable for quite some time. It's also tied to an unpopular and also sexualized costume. Some may just think it's silly, it lacks depth, it's Dark Phoenix light and not as good, or that what it was working through wasn't worth exploring and that it ultimately weakened the character and didn't strengthen her. Or some may feel that the elements have just aged incredibly poorly, or even poor at the time, that they just didn't match the social mores. However, regardless of whether or not one likes it, irrespective of that, it's worth discussing. I think there's interesting things there, even if it's just breaking down why one doesn't like it. There's a lot of shaming that can happen with certain arcs, particularly if people enjoy certain costumes. It's something you'll see in certain corners online. Perhaps you haven't seen it. Maybe you have. Let me know. To the shaming I say nay, not in my Christian Minecraft server. The more I look at it, the more I like it. But just in general, it must be said that these things are the most fun when you can discuss them, when you can feel passionate about them and have that space to be yay or nay or meh and just have fun with it. I like to think that this is one of those spaces, so let's discuss it down below. I enjoy the concept of Malice in terms of the idea of the shadow self being present and then absorbed into oneself so that one can be their ultimate self. having faced and embraced their shadow. But those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. I'm sure you have them. People were very passionate about this arc, as passionate as me, but perhaps in the other way. So please leave your thoughts down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Are you going to be playing this skin? Let me know all the thoughts. Thanks so much as always for taking some time today spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye. This was supposed to be a quick update video because I saw the skin and then it just went places.